right, good morning, everyone. I want to say happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. I've often said Mother's Day and Father's Day can be somewhat bittersweet. A lot of us still have our moms and dads, but a lot of us don't. But I do want to say happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. Open your Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. This is the second sermon talking about relationships. We're really talking about what it means to become like Christ each and every day. And the strange thing is, those of us who've been at this a long time, who claim we have grown as disciples, and indeed we may have when we use our own metrics. We talk about church attendance, we talk about Bible knowledge, we talk about serving in the church, those sort of things. But honestly, when you look at the scriptures and things like the fruit of the Spirit, which can only be expressed through relationships, you have love, joy, peace, patience, goodness. These things can't be done by yourself. They have to be expressed through relationships. And this is really how we know that we are growing in Christ, not necessarily by church attendance or Bible knowledge or serving in the church. Every good Christian will want to do those things, but really, what do our relationships look like? Are we kind to people? Are we loving to people? I'm not talking about people that you like. I'm talking about people that you don't necessarily like. What does that look like? Are you forgiving? Do you try to repair relationships when you possibly can? What do your relationships look like? And we really don't talk about this in church all that much, but it is real Christianity. And I've told you many times what my desire is to have real church, to be real Christians, to be authentic. And oftentimes that just doesn't look so tidy-whitey and clean all the time. Now, I told you last week that I think a lot of people come to church not to heal, but to hide. And so I really want to talk a little bit about that today and next week. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been to a job interview? Yeah. I know this crowd, it's kind of seasoned, I guess. But I would say it's been a long time since you've been to a job interview, right? But we've all been to a job interview. And one of the most silly questions that they always ask this question, and I think it's just stupid, okay? Let me say stupid, is what is your greatest weakness? What is your greatest weakness? And I find that absolutely silly. Like, we're going to tell people our greatest weaknesses, right? I mean, we don't like to tell people that we love what our weaknesses are. We're sure not going to tell someone that we don't know. And what's funny about it is you can go onto a website and they will coach you on how to answer that question. Like, I went on one website and they say to make something that's not really a weakness into a weakness. Are you tracking with me? So if I'm sitting across from someone and they're interviewing me and they say, what is your greatest weakness? I can say something like this. I guess I just try too hard. I just always want to give 110% to my employer. I feel that I owe that to them. And I always just try really, really hard. I want to show up on time, and I want to give 110%, but sometimes when I do that, man, I just make a few mistakes. Yeah, I guess that's my greatest weakness. I mean, you see what I did there? Right? The fact is, nobody, absolutely nobody, wants to share their weaknesses, do they? We want to present what? Strength. We don't want to present weakness, and we sure don't want to tell people about our weaknesses. But what if sharing our weaknesses is the key to having healthy relationships? Are you tracking with me? What if sharing our weaknesses is a key to having healthy relationships? Because people, if they don't truly know you, they can't fully love you, right? And we have to be honest, our weaknesses make a big part of who we are, right? I would say for just about everybody, it's probably 1/4%. For someone like me, I'm probably tracking at 50% of who I am is my weaknesses. But what if someone, if they don't know everything about me, they can't fully love me? Am I on to something there? I know you guys get tired of, me talking about my wife, but other than Jesus, she's my best subject, right? And the reason I love my wife so much is she knows everything about me. She knows my weaknesses, and that's kind of humiliating to me because I want to present strength. I don't want her to know my weaknesses, but she knows. And she still loves me. Again, what if sharing our weaknesses is a key to having healthy relationships? What if being authentic is the key to revival? There was a pastor in Austin, Texas named Ken Phillips. Ken Phillips. He was a very dedicated pastor, pastored a very large church. Of course, in Texas, you have all the mega churches and everything like that. About 2,000 people every week in the audience, and plus a live television audience. In one Sunday, he was preaching on the sin of pride and vanity. And he was talking about how if you have pride and vanity, you can't really have healthy relationships with God and other people because you're not being authentic. You're trying to hide things, right? Now, one thing you need to know about Pastor Phillips is from a very young age, he started losing his hair. We're talking in the teens, and by the time he was 18 years old, he didn't have any hair at all. And Pastor Phillips, instead of just dealing with it, he started wearing a hairpiece. Now, there's nothing wrong with wearing a hairpiece, but the thing about it is, nobody at the church knew that he wore a hairpiece. Even the people who had been there a really long time, because Pastor Phillips had started wearing a hairpiece at a very young age. And so this one Sunday, he's preaching on pride and vanity and being authentic, and all of a sudden he just reaches up and pulls his hairpiece off. Everybody was so quiet. But then people started hooping and hollering, people started praying, people started applauding. I mean, it was absolutely amazing, and what ensued was a revival. I kid you not. You're looking at me like I'm making this up. I'm not. I make a lot of stuff up now, but I'm not making this up. All you have to do is Google it, hairpiece revival. But I tell you what, it was powerful. People were they were canceling their vacations to spend time with each other, to get in groups, to be more authentic with each other. Young people were making pledges to dress more modestly. It was so powerful. Why was it so powerful? Huh? Yeah. It was one man not only bearing his bare head, but his soul, right? Really. That's powerful. One person being real. In 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul is facing opposition. Now, you may think, how in the world can Paul face opposition? Well, in his day, he faced a lot of opposition. We only know Paul through his letters and 2,000 years of church history, and we really think a lot of Paul, but in his days, the reviews were very, very mixed. Now, understand, Paul planted this church, but by the time Paul wrote this letter, these people really didn't care at all. They understood that the Apostle Paul was an apostle, but they really didn't think of him as a first-rate apostle. And they were saying all kinds of things about Paul, that he was ugly, that he couldn't preach a lick, that he could write a really, really good letter, but he couldn't preach a lick. Now, understand, one of the reasons for this is because after Paul planted this church, now, you probably know how Paul operated. He would go off on these missionary journeys. He would go into these cities and he would preach the gospel. Someone would get saved. He would plant a church and he would stay there for a while trying to train these people, and he would go off. Okay? After Paul planted this church in Corinth and he left, some other preachers came in. okay? Now, Paul, he refers to these other preachers as super apostles. Now, he's being very, very, very sarcastic. Now, what you need to understand about these super apostles is they were very eloquent. They had impressive resumes. They had seminary degrees. When they spoke eloquently. They wore suits and ties. And they were telling these Corinthian believers that Paul is not a first-rate apostle. These super apostles took money for their preaching. Paul never took a dime. He never took a dime. And the reason he didn't take a dime is because he wanted the church to spend the money on missions. But these super apostles, they took money. Paul was a bivocational pastor. I've said this many times. Today in America, Paul wouldn't be able to pastor a church over 100 people. I guarantee it. Because he was kind of ugly and he couldn't speak worth a lick. He was just an old country preacher. And this is the circumstance here in 2 Corinthians, okay? Paul writes all kinds of letters trying to convince them. This is 2 Corinthians, but there were at least 4 or 5 letters that he wrote that we don't have. You need to understand this is Paul's last effort to convince these people that he is an apostle, that they should listen to him, okay? This is his chance. He's hanging on to this church by a thread. And this is what he says starting in verse 24. 2 Corinthians 11, starting in verse 24. Okay, it says, 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced dangers in the city, in the desert, and on the seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty, and have often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold, and I've been without clothing to keep me warm. Okay, I find this absolutely amazing because this is how Paul starts out. Okay, remember what he's doing. He's trying to convince these people that he's a real apostle. Okay, that they need to listen to him. And this is how he starts out. He starts out almost trying to make himself look bad, right? It would be like if I was to get someone to come and preach revival, and the first night the guy gets up and said, well, you know, the last revival I preached, they took me out back and whooped the far out of me. The second revival I preached, they took me out back and tried to stone me to death. In fact, everywhere I preach, they tried to kill me. I mean, this is basically what Paul is saying here. It seems like he's going out of his way to make himself look bad, because this is definitely not the way I would have went about it. I mean, I really wouldn't have. Here's what I would have done. I would have said this. You know how many churches I planted? And gave them the number. You know how many people I baptized? And gave them that number. You may have heard of these 2 dynamic preachers named Timothy and Titus. Yeah, I did that. I trained them. But Paul seems to be leaving out everything that we would put in and putting in everything that we would leave out. It's actually crazy. Why does he do it? Look at verse 30. If I must boast, I would rather boast about things that show how weak I am. Let me say that again. If I must boast, I would rather boast about things that show how weak I am. This is exactly the opposite of how you and I approach relationships in life, is it not? We don't want to shine light on our weaknesses, do we? But this is how Paul lives his life. Paul is basically saying here, you know what makes me an apostle? You know why you shouldn't listen to me? I've hungered for it. I've bled for it. I've shivered in the cold for it. This is why you should listen to me. Now let me ask you a question. Does this make Paul sound weak? Seriously, does this make Paul sound weak? I guess it depends on your perspective, right? It really does. But this is how Paul lived his life. Why? Because people will never, unless people show their weaknesses, they will never see the glory of God. Do you understand that? Unless people know about your nervous breakdown, unless people know your anger issues, unless people know your addiction issues, unless people know that you just have some issues, they will never know how God showed up and got you through those things. Does that make sense? And I'm here to tell you the church will never be the church until we start being vulnerable. You know what vulnerability is? Anybody know what it is? To me, simply put, it's giving people enough rope to hang you if they want to. And some people will. But the ones who don't, man, you're talking about relationships. You know, the church will never be the church until we start getting real. Oftentimes, this is what I mean by people go to church to hide instead of to heal. Pastor asked for prayer concerns, and a lot of people give prayer concerns, but it's never about them, is it? It's never about them. It's always about Aunt Susie's cousin's sister who's having surgery on her toe or something like that. Now listen, we need to pray for everybody. I'm not making fun of that. But what about you? Why is it I only hear about your marriage falling apart when you're signing the divorce papers? You know, why is it that no one ever says, I have anger issues, I have forgiveness issues, I am very mad at this person and I just can't seem to forgive them? Why does no one do that? Why? Any suggestions? Yeah, we're showing our weaknesses. But again, what if showing our weaknesses is the way to be healed and glorify God? You know, Paul basically says here, I'm not eloquent. I don't speak well. Yeah, I'm not much to look at. I'm not like these super apostles, but they won't tell you who they really are. I'm bearing my soul to you, he says. That's what he's doing. I'm telling you, the church will never be the church until we stop coming in here and acting like everything's fine. Because it's not fine. It's not fine. One quick story, and I'll be done. I may have told this story before. In the first church I pastored, there was this mother and daughter. The mother was about 65 years old. The daughter was about 42. And the daughter had problems. She had a car accident, and her injury and my injury are very much the same. It affected our brain and our memory and stuff, but hers is kind of worse. Her brain would get she would call it so jumbled up. That's what she would call it. And it was like she was going insane, and the only way she could relieve the pressure was to cut herself. Have any of y'all ever known cutters? Yeah. And she would cut herself. Probably 7 times I took the 30-minute trip out to her house in the middle of the night to get her and put her in my car with blood dripping everywhere to take her to the 6th floor of the medical center. This went on for years and years and years. After she stopped cutting herself, she started taking methamphetamine to make all of that up there go away. And then she started selling it. I found out about it, and I told her, I said, You're going to have to stop this or I'm going to turn you in. And she stopped about it, and this started, I only stayed at that church for about 4 or 5 years, but we're still friends today, but this started like a 5-6 year relationship, a hard relationship of her going through detox and different programs. She would come and see me at my house at least 2 or 3 times a week. And today, this woman is something else. But what I'm saying is, when you talk to her, you know what she brings up all the time? Her weaknesses. She will come right out and tell you, yeah, I did drugs. I cut myself all the time. I was messed up. She's not proud about those things, but you know what she's proud about? God showing up. God showing up. Does any of this make any sense? Let's pray. Father God,